Howdy folks, today we are going to be taking a look at the Chrome Debugger. Why you want to use it, how you would use it, a couple tips and tricks to help you out along the way. Let's get started. So you might be wondering, what is a debugger? Why do we use a debugger? So a debugger is, at a very high level, it's an ability to step through and pick through your code line by line, bit by bit, and have an understanding of what the code looks like, what the variables look like, what the system looks like in general when you get there. It's quite valuable. In this example, this is a fairly short example, but you could see for much more complicated examples with hundreds of thousands of lines of code, it's not always clear what has gone wrong, or even if something has gone wrong and maybe the system's behaving exactly as intended, it's just not doing what you thought it was supposed to do. So a debugger can be really useful for stepping through each line one at a time and looking at all the variables and seeing how it works. You could always use console log, stuff like that, and that is kind of a tried and true method, but it's also a little clunky. It involves you writing a lot of code. It involves you kind of guessing, honestly, a lot of guesswork. Debugging is still a little bit of guesswork, or using debugger, but it's also more targeted guesswork. So to start off, let's take a look at the example I have here. It's pretty simple. Document, I have a style sheet, I have an ID for my content, and I have a script. Take a look at my script. The script is pretty simple. It grabs the content, it defines a list of names. We have this thing I pull from Stack Overflow, and then create entry. Create entry picks a random number between 0 and names.length, looks up that name, creates a div, adds a class, sets the name, appends it to the content, and I do that 1,000 times. So if I run it, this is basically what you see. Some very simple styling, right? And you can see some of the names are repeating. That's totally fine. We got Jen, Casey, Bob, Jen, Bob, Travis, Sarah. Undefined. Well, that's not great. Why do we have undefined? Some of you who are good with your code may already know why we're getting undefined from looking at the example. But let's take a look at that. Undefined. What does that mean? Well, first of all, right-click, inspect. Now, if I look here, name container, it's undefined, right? If I reload it, it moves undefined because it's random, right? I'm picking random stuff. So some point we're not able to figure out what name we're getting. So somehow, I know the problem's probably somewhere around here, right? So how do we figure out what the issue is? Well, we could just put console logs in, right? Console log name index, names.length, etc. And that will almost always work. So, but let me show you what happens if I console log name. Okay, let's take a look at our console. I got 1,000 entries. Now, in this particular example, this is pretty simple. I can write a bunch of other stuff, but you may not always have the option. Sometimes you may be running 10,000 times over something, and that's a lot of console logs. So console logging can only get you so far. To be fair, it is my go-to, and that's just because you can't always access a good debugger. But if you do have the debugger, you should take advantage of it. So let's look at our Chrome Debugger. Chrome Debugger starts from, once you have your tools open, so again, you can go up here to the dots, and then come down here to more tools, developer tools. You can also use this shortcut here, or my favorite is just right-click, inspect. If you go to the sources tab, okay, you can see all your sources. This, if you're using something like Webpack or Vite to build your code, you may see something a little differently. It will also, if you have other websites you're pulling code from, you'll see that in here as well. Assets.js, you notice this mimics the file structure I have in the project. And I click script.js. Make this a little bit bigger. So this actually pops up now. This is actually kind of the debugger panel. What I want to do is I want to say, okay, where do I think the problem might be starting? This actually is a little out of date. Well, let's maybe right here, line 16. So if I find line 16 here, I know by this point the name is bad. If I go over here and I click this, this sets a breakpoint. And you can see over here, breakpoints, script. Turn it off. turn it on. You can also uncheck it here, and that just kind of makes it inactive, but it keeps it around. Can be useful in some cases. So now when I run this code again, notice nothing's printed on the side, and it says paused in debugger. Now if I look over here, I say, okay, it's stopped. The execution of the code has frozen at this line. This is useful because I can now see what the values are. This is the container, name Sarah, name index. That's local. If you look at global, you can get a bunch of other stuff. If you look at the script, I can see there's a content holder and names as well. So this is if you have closures, right? You can see that in here. In the console here, I can also say, like, okay, what's the name? Okay, you have access in the console at this point to any variable in scope at this point. Okay, up here there's a couple options. These are the options here. I can, if I click play, the script will continue executing until it hits another breakpoint. And then basically it's just kind of like saying, yeah, go from here. So if I do that, Sarah shows up and then it's just the next time, right? Which actually does happen to be undefined. Now there's a couple other ones. This one, step over. If I run that, it moves to the next line. So you can see we started on line 16. Now it's stepped to the next line. If I continue to step, it's going to go to the end of the function, pop out to the loop. You see the I++, I less than 1,000, create entry. And now what I have the opportunity, because I'm at a function here, if I step again, it's not going to go back to the function necessarily. Well, I mean, it will hit the breakpoint again. But this button is step into. So if I click this when I'm on a function call, it's going to take me to the first line of that function. I could actually go into this one as well. Now, if I'm done, I'm saying, okay, I'm good. I want to go up a function. I click here, and now it takes me, it says, okay, we're done with this function. It now takes me to the next line. Step, step, step. So you're going to use these controls a lot. Some debuggers also have a run to cursor, so you can like click somewhere and say run until you get to the cursor. I don't know if that's what this button does. Yeah, it looks like it is. So if I just put my cursor here and I say run to cursor, oh no, maybe it just steps. Maybe this is just another step. Oh, but it looks like this steps, but it steps into the function. That's pretty cool. So it's just going to step over everything. I like that. Not every debugger has that. But yeah, some have a run to cursor. This one has this one where it'll step into the functions as well. Some of these you don't necessarily want to step into. Like, it's smart enough to know document.create element. I probably don't want to go into. But if you're using a library like React or something like that, sometimes you don't want to step into those functions because they just end up with really difficult stuff. Anyway, at this point, if I run through here, okay, I've got Jen, I've got Sarah, I've got Travis, blah, blah, blah. What I really want is I kind of want it to, when I get to undefined, I want it to break at that point. So the way you can do that is if I go in here and as I say, okay, if name equals undefined, oops, debugger. What's that do? When Chrome hits this, it immediately kicks the debugger out. So you can see I have no breakpoints here. I run this, and here we go. It's gone through all of these, and it finally took a while. You can see what is useful. Hit one, and that says name is undefined, hit the debugger. Why did I put that in an if block? Well, if I did debugger every time, it's unskippable. All right. So this is kind of useful if you want to put some conditions into when your breakpoint should be hit, because this lets you put that breakpoint in the code. If this is closed, it has absolutely no effect. It doesn't do anything at all. The debugger statement only works if you actually have the debugger open, or the dev tools. Okay, so now I can see, all right, name undefined, name index 5. So let's see. Names, name index. Well, that's undefined. Why? Well, I can see, okay, names.length is 5. And here's where the bug actually comes in, which I can find because I know what the name index is at this point. It's 5. 5. Every time it's undefined, it's 5. And the reason is names.length is 5. This is overrunning the array. That's really the thing, because min and max is included. I should not actually have the max. So if I just say -1, run through that. after a certain point, I no longer have any undefined. This is something that you can also do. You notice I made the change in here. If you have, in some cases, and you can see it's got this little triangle up here, it changes this file were not saved to the file system. You can occasionally change the code from in here. It doesn't always work super well, but it can be useful if you're just testing out a theory. So now I come here, -1, reload, and there we go. My debugger never triggered, which tells me that none of these are undefined. So again, when you're looking at your scripts, as a summary, click here, sets a breakpoint. Sometimes, like you can see when I click 13, it jumps to 14 because Chrome is smart enough to know there's nothing there. There's no code there. It doesn't care. The debugger in your code will also trigger that, and that can be used to actually put some conditions on that. When you are in the debug and it stops, you actually have access to the local variables, and you have access to the console where you can type stuff. You can type, this is a regular console. I could type document get element by ID, stuff like that, and those changes will take effect. You can step over, you can step into. I wouldn't recommend stepping into that. If you step out, it pops up to the top. This little guy here will just step and step in at the same time, so it'll just run through all of your code. Pretty useful if you got a simple code base. So that's pretty much the Chrome debugger. It's not the hardest thing in the world to use. The biggest complication is figuring out where to put your breakpoints, but that just comes with practice. Usually what I like to do is try to find something close to where my issue probably is, usually before it happens, and then step into it until I get to that issue. So yeah, I hope this is helpful, and I'll see y'all next time.